There are two methods of overtime calculation in CenterPoint. This video covers setting up the advanced overtime process. This is a flexible process that can handle a variety of overtime calculations, including multiple overtime rates, average wage calculations, daily and weekly overtime, and overtime periods that do not align with pay periods. If your overtime calculations are simple, just one overtime rate for any hours over the overtime threshold, I recommend you view our topic on simple overtime processing. The first step of the advanced overtime setup is to create an earning. Go to Setup, Payroll Details, Earnings. Now you may already have an existing overtime earning from manually entering overtime, but you will need to create a new one specifically for calculated overtime. And it's possible to create multiple calculated overtime earnings if you have different groups of employees that earn overtime with a different calculation. Click New to create the earning, and like any earning, it needs an abbreviation and name and an expense account. The type needs to be calculated overtime, which will automatically switch the method to calculated overtime and give us an earning detail here where we can specify how this overtime calculates. The number of days in an overtime period defaults to 7 for weekly overtime. But if you pay overtime based on the total number of hours worked in 2 weeks, you could change that to 14, for example. The overtime period start date needs to be on the correct day of the week. So does your overtime go Sunday through Saturday or Wednesday through Tuesday, whatever it may be? And then you want to make sure that you pick a date prior to the first pay run we're going to be using this overtime earning. Then we define how the overtime is calculated. So hours over, for example, if you get time and a half over 40 hours, you want a row that looks like this. And for some people, that'll be all they set up, but if you can have multiple rows. So if you get, for example, double time for hours worked over 60, you can add an additional row like this. You can also set up daily rates. That can be in conjunction with period rates, or it can just be a strictly daily overtime. And here it's the number of hours in the day and the multiplier. For daily overtime, it is important to note that the time needs to be entered through timesheets for the individual days so that the system knows which day those hours were worked. When you click Save, it will prompt you to add this earning to any employees. If you want to do that right now, go ahead and click Yes, otherwise click No. And if you want to come back later, you can right-click and choose Add to Employees to do this at any time. Select which employees to add it to and click Add. You can also add the earning to the employees one at a time in the employee setup. The next step is to specify which earnings the overtime applies to. Most regular earnings are subject to overtime. So you'd want to edit, say, an hourly pay type earning and make sure to check the box that says include in calculated overtime. Save that. But vacation, leave, sick time, PTO type earnings are usually not included in overtime. So for example, I want to edit my vacation here and verify that this box is not checked. Earnings like a bonus or commission that are not paid hourly are often subject to overtime, and the rate for the commission or the bonus will be included in the average rate it calculates for the overtime pay. So if that's the case, you want to make sure these types of earnings also say include in calculated overtime. The next step is to set up this earning on the employee. Set up employees. I'm going to edit my employee here. And then go to the Earnings tab. If I hadn't already, when I saved the earning, I could come down here and add the earning now. And the important thing here is this on the overtime earning section. This needs to be filled in with the overtime for this employee. Remember, you could have multiple calculated overtime earnings for different calculations, and the system needs to know which one this employee will use. If you have multiple employees that you want to add that same earning code to at the same time, you can do that through the mass update. Maybe under general and calculated overtime earning. So I can specify that they all use this same overtime earning and update everybody at once. Just keep in mind that this overtime earning has to be available on the employee already in order to do this mass update. Then the last part of the overtime setup is the pay stub. We have a stub designed for the advanced overtime so that it clearly shows the regular and the overtime hours. To set that pay stub in your preferences, go to File, Preferences, Payroll, and then payroll printing for the advices or the checks. Is the stub type would need to be set to standard with overtime and benefits. Now the setup of the advanced overtime is complete. To see how the advanced overtime is used on a pay run, please see our video on processing payroll with advanced overtime.